And we're back. And it's COMP392. It's week 6, part 2 of our broadcast. And so how do we do it, guys? Anyone have a solution that we can people can share? What do we do to cast the shadows? And what do I do it on? Is it on the renderer? Is it on the set on the camera? What is it on?
Spotlight.
Spotlight. Okay, I got an intensity of 2 and an angle and a distance of 200 and a casting shadows is true. And what else do I do?
Shadow camera near
Spotlight dot shadow. If I start typing shadow, right, I get shadow bias, shadow camera bottom, shadow camera far, field of view, left, near, right, top, darkness, map height, and map width. Map height and map width. If I go to shadow camera near, right, what's the value? By 1. The options are, it says type void is not assignable to type number. I need to add a number of some sort. And where do I get that documentation? If I say 1, I save it. If I go back out to the web page here to see what it looks like now, I got some shadows going on, but it's still kind of fuzzy. You got a fuzzy shadow going on here. And sometimes you get, especially if it's a cube or something, you get these really weird fuzzy shadows. So how do I tighten those shadows up and make it really, really sharp? Like a higher resolution shadow. Anyone come up with that? Okay, let's try that out. So, all right, let's try this out here. So let's go back to, I'll try them both ways. So I'll say shadow map height and width. So spotlight dot shadow map height. And it's a number, right? So let's say make it 2048. And spotlight dot shadow map width 2048. It's crazy. But let's put it in there. See what happens now. Much sharper. See that? How clean it is? Right? It's hard to tell, but when you have another object instead of a sphere, it's a cube. You'll see how it rotates. It'll cast weird shadows like that. And if I'm going to slow this down for a second. So again, just to recap, the axis helper is actually casting these lines, almost like ray casting, right? And that's what this is doing. This imaginary lines are coming out, showing you where the X and Y axis starts. And this is, sorry, the X and Z. And here's the Y up here, right? So X is the red line, Z is the blue line, right? So it shows you anything between here is what it's looking at, right? It's looking over here, looking over here. It's almost like your enemy is looking at different spots, right? That's what's happening right now. Okay, cool. What I want to do is I want to be able to zoom in or walk around this thing with the camera, right? And there's a bit of a gist I have up online to check this out. So if I go to, if you come up to my, to me, and if you look at my gists, right? So if I go gists, right? I have a couple of them you can look up for me. One of them is this first person controls.d.ts file that I made, right? How do you find my gists? Can you see them right off the top? Gists on GitHub, or what they are, is a single file that you share. So if you have like a little code file or some kind of template that I want up here, like let's say we keep on doing these things where I want to kind of put it together, a little HTML boilerplate, those kind of things I can put up here, and they're ready to go. So I can, kind of copy and paste the gist. And I can use that in my code. I can also download it as a zip, download zip file, right? But it's only one document, one file. I can also, this is the really cool part. Take a look at this. I can use embed, right, to embed the gist. So I can host it here on GitHub. That's kind of cool, right? Almost like a CDN, and point to it, right, with this little script right here. So that's kind of cool too, right? So I can embed, I can share, I can clone, I can do all kinds of stuff. Really cool little thing to do, gists. And we'll do more and more in GitHub as we go on, right? All right, so I got this this code. I'm going to click raw. I like doing raw. When I do a code copy, I want to do raw. And look what this looks like. It looks like a bunch of variables, and you see that there is a class declaration. So there's first person controls. That's what it is. And here's my constructor. Notice that there's two optional elements, an object and a DOM element. And then I have all this. Right? So I'm going to take this, and I want to make this file called firstpersoncontrols.d.ts. Why? Why am I doing this thing? Why don't I just download, why don't I use TSD to do that for me? So I'm going to go back to here, and I want to look and see if I can find that, right? So I'm going to kind of find that. I'm going to open in terminal. Here's my terminal. I already got this other terminal window running. I'll run it over here. And I want to see that, if I can find that. So I'm going to say TSD install, and I want to find that file. Does it exist, right? So if I do something like this, if I say, first person controls, right? And that's what I want to find. And then minus save, because that's how I want it, right? I want first person controls to come from the web, right? So look, I use TSD and I get 0. Because not all TypeScript libraries, have a type definition for them, right? Let's take a look at the definition before I copy and paste that gist that I have online, right? Under my scripts file, right, I have a lib folder where I have all my 3JS files. By the way, this 3JS folder has a bunch of examples in here. Like, for example, controls. I have things like drag controls, editor controls, first person controls. Hey, there they are, first person controls. My fly controls, mouse controls, orbit controls, orthographic trackball controls, even has VR controls. There's all kinds of stuff that it has in here. This library is full of examples, crossfaders and curves and geometries and all kinds of loaders to load up things like, things from Blender, or to export your file. There's tons and tons of stuff here, but none of them, not one of them, has a type definition library, which makes it kind of hard to work with at times, right? So we need to add this in. So the first thing you do is, if I add in a library, I need to point to it first and attach it to my index.html. So I want to go to the examples. So under lib, I remember I used Bower to get this, right? I'm going to go to 3JS. Under 3JS, I'm going to go to examples. Under examples, JS. And then inside there, under controls, I have my first person control.js. If I click onto it, it's just a JavaScript library with no code hinting, right? And I need to kind of get this thing working, so I get some code hinting for this thing. In fact, right now, it's not even attached to my files. So let's do that first. So I'm going to go to my index.html. By the way, this is the way to add additional libraries for 3JS, which plagues us all. If you look at the book example, you're missing something, it's not working, and then this is the way to do it. I want to put it underneath my 3.min.js. Why? Yeah, 3 is kind of the main library, so I don't want to put it before that, because then it won't know what 3 is and it might cause problems. So kind of put it in here. I want to use my kind of do a script file. So script source. I want to point to that place, scripts. It's kind of a longer one, lib, and then it's 3.js. And then instead of build, right, like I said, it's going to be under examples. So that's the next piece, examples. And then JS controls. And then it's first person controls. We'll do a bunch of them over time, right? .js, right? There we go. I'm not sure what that looks like. That's the actual like. So you need to put this in. Remember that your index.html, even though we've been using this whole thing as a game and everything else. Remember that even though we're using the 3JS library, it's still an HTML page. It's still web, right? Which means I can treat it like an HTML page. And if that's true, then I need to use my index.html as my manifest to tie all my JavaScript files together, right? And it has to be in loaded order. That's the right way. So I need to know about 3JS first, and then I need to load this first person controls. But even if I do this, I'm going to get 0 code hinting right now. Okay, so let me fix that problem. So all my code hinting, remember, for TypeScript is inside my typings folder. If I go to typings, I see a bunch of stuff in here. And under 3JS, this is where my 3.d.ts file is. I want to put my other one in here too. Why not? So let's add it in. So I'm going to right click and go new file. And I'll do it the manual way. And I'll say first person controls .d.ts. And notice that it's a new type definition file, and I don't have a type definition. Type definition files, all they do, think about them as abstract classes. You don't declare anything for the JavaScript at all. All you're doing is you're outlining what the JavaScript document actually looks like. So if I go back to my gist for a second, here's my gist. I'm going to copy it instead of you guys doing all that work. I'm going to go back here and paste it. And now let's take a look what I'm doing. I'm using the declare method, or the declare keyword, to declare a module called 3. Well, that module's already been declared. So what am I doing? I'm extending the 3.js module, that namespace. I'm extending it, and I'm adding another class called first person controls. I need a constructor because my constructor declaration, which is right here, it tells 3.js what parameters I'm going to take in. And right now, I don't know what type of parameters these are because I'm making this myself. No one's helped me make this thing. I don't know what DOM element means. Is that an HTML element? It could be a bunch of other things. I could make these any. So if I'm not sure what they are, I could just type in any like this, which would solve my problem, right? But remember what any's doing. Any's kind of flipping the bird to TypeScript saying, we don't need you, right? So that's okay for this piece, but for these ones, I've gone very, very slowly through, because I don't know what object is. It could be object, like capital O. It could be a 3.js object. It could be a object 3D. I don't know what it is, because this is not my library. But I know some of these. How did I figure these ones out, right? Well, if I go back to my library definition, let's take a look at it. I'll kind of pull it up side by side so you can see what I'm talking about here, so you can figure out your own, right? And if I look at my first-person controls, here's my first-person controls, and I'm going to pull up, next to it, I'm going to pull up my first-person control.d.ts. Let's take a look to what this looks like. Here's my actual library here. This is like, classic JavaScript style, right? And here's what my declaration module looks like, right? Notice that first-person controls is written in the classic JavaScript prototypal inheritance style, right? So there is no constructor. But once you see this, once you see 3.firstPerson control is equal to function, think about this as the constructor function right here, this part. And that's what I've done here. I've taken this piece and I've put it in here. I've mentioned this as a class, which is actually a closure. That's what it is. That's what this piece is. And now all of this stuff that has this.object and so on, I've put them in here. I've just noted them each. I'm just labeling each one of them as what they are. Well, object, I don't know what that is. I know what this one is, a 3-type vector, and I can put that in, 3.vector. So I know that's what it's saying over here. And DOM element, don't know what that is. I'm thinking it's probably some kind of HTML element, but I'm not sure. So I'm not going to put that in. That might cause errors. Enabled is equal to true. If I hover over this, it says any, but I know if it's true or false, it's probably Boolean, and that's what I've labeled this object as. I've typed it as a Boolean, right? So I've made my best guesses, and I've done that throughout my entire code. And then at the bottom, I've got a bunch of my function declarations right here. The way TypeScript knows that they're functions and not variables is that they have the parentheses and a potential return. Let me take a look at that. Let's go to the first one. Handle resize. Here's a function, handle resize. It has a function that takes no parameters and doesn't return anything. There we go, handle resize. Function takes no parameters, returns void. And all I'm doing is mentioning what they are. Once I've done this, I've completed my type declaration for my JavaScript library. So this is what we call conversion. I want to convert a project. Your boss has come to you and said, you know what, Supergirl, I want you to convert this JavaScript. Yeah, I'm talking to you. I want you to convert this JavaScript this whole JavaScript project. I want you to convert it to TypeScript because we're going to make it larger. And we're going to use, enterprise best practices with agile project methodology. And we're going to continue to expand this library, but we want to convert it over to TypeScript because it's the new and sexy way of doing things. So can you convert everything for me? And you're going to say, absolutely not. I have no idea what you're talking about because converting stuff with TypeScript is hard, right? You need to kind of look at the library and figure things out. Well, it's not really that hard. What's missing here is each of these things here, each one of these things, if I wanted to, I could add special comments, a special commenting style to give an idea of what it's looking for. Like, for example, target is the vector3 object that I'm targeting, all right? I could put that in. So if I wanted to add that in as comments, let me show you that. Actually, I'll do that afterwards when I add it in. I could put some comments before everything. Okay, so I've got my type definition library right here, but it hasn't really been added to my game in any way. So how do I do that? Well, here's my first-person controls.d.ts, and I do have in my typings, I do have a tsd.d.ts file, right? That's inside my typings right here. And notice that I also have already this 3.d.ts file right here. So I need to make a reference to it to add it into my typings. So I'm going to say // and I'll say reference path equals to, and then inside there, instead of 3.js and 3.d.ts, I'll say first person controls.d.ts. By the way, the short form for d.ts is DTS. You might hear that, DTS, your DTS files. Right? I'm going to save that. When I've done that, now I've got a reference to my first person control.d.ts file. Okay, that's step one. So one, I have a reference. Now I can get code hinting, which is what I wanted, right? And I want to start including this in my file. Okay, let's go back. Let's kind of clean up some of this stuff and close it up so I don't kill myself with all these scripts being open. Go back to my core library for a second. Okay, I want to use this first-person controller. Who knows what a first-person controller is? I mean, if you played any kind of first-person shooter, it's like the camera is moving and it's looking like you're moving into the scene. That's what's happening because the camera is your eyes on the scene, right? So as I move forward, the camera moves and I can look wherever I'm looking is how the scene is being viewed. Okay, cool. In order for me to do this properly, and whoever has done Unity, who's done Unity in the past? I know some people have, right? If you guys have done Unity, remember how we had two different kinds of updates. What are the two different kinds of updates in Unity? There's fixed update, and there's update. There's actually a third one, last update, and so on. What do I need? What do I use fixed update for in Unity, for those people who did Unity? Physics. And also for things like movement like this. And the reason for it is because fixed update uses a fixed delta time, right? So in order for me to use something like a first-person shooter camera, for me to walk through and stuff like this, I need to use a timer. And so part of what's built into Three.js is something called the clock, right? So we have our game loop, but I also want to kind of calculate the clock, right? So in my imports, I'm going to add a new import. I'm going to call this clock, which is going to be of type 3.clock. I don't want to type 3.clock all the time. Right, there it is. Now that I've added the clock in, here's my renderer and my camera. So before I do my scene, right, before I render my scene, what I want to do here is I want to set up my clock. So I want to say clock, right? Oh, by the way, make sure I got a variable for that. I forgot to put that in there too. Var clock is of type clock. There we go. So clock then is equal to a new clock object. I need to do that. I kind of set the clock, set up Three.js clock object. This is a kind of a counter. This is going to set up my time.delta time, that whole idea. Without that, I don't have it available to me. Okay, cool. 3.clock. Okay, 3.clock. All right, cool. So I've got my clock. That's one thing I need. And the next thing I need to know is, okay, so I want to start adding my control in, my controller, right? And I want to kind of put it in above everything else because I want to start moving my camera around. So I've kind of declared my camera. And before I add my plane and my sphere geometry, my axis and all that kind of stuff, my spotlights and everything else, this is where I want to put it in. And by the way, I took away my ambient light. So you can see that I've reduced the light there. Sometimes ambient light kind of washes things out, and that's why I removed it. So instead of me copying everything by hand, I've got another gist up on GitHub. So I want you guys to get used to gists, right? And if I go to my gists, I have two. I have my game.ts, another gist that I put up, right? That shows me just that way. I have this clock is equal to new clock. I need that. And this piece, instead of me typing it, I'm just going to grab it. It's going to go right underneath the setup camera function. Grab this thing right here. I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to go, and just to be sure, by the way, sometimes it's best that you go into raw mode for the gists, just so that you don't grab any extraneous HTML, right? So I'm going to grab all this stuff. Right, this is all my gist. Has anyone not been able to see my gist? You guys should all see it. Sorry? Yeah, it's on there. Yeah. So if I go to up here, to thing here. So again, I'm right before, or just right after the camera. So here's my setup camera. Right between that and the plane, I'm going to add in my control, right? And now you notice that there is no first-person controls. I need to add that in. So how do I do that? This is the first test to see that my library is there. I'm going to say var first-person controls, right, is of type first-person controls, capitals, first-person controls. But I don't have that. I need to add that in as a namespace up here. My imports. Let's do that. So import first-person controls, right, is equal to 3.first-person control. And look how it comes up, right? It comes up because I've added in my code hinting. Otherwise, it would never have come up here. I would never be able to see this namespace if I didn't do my code hinting properly. All right, cool. Now I've got this in there. And now this is all good, right? These errors are all gone. And I do a console.log. I'm not going to, that's kind of telling me what I'm looking at. I don't need this piece. Let's put that. That was just my troubleshooting that I was doing. Get rid of this. So that's two things. Now I need one more thing. So this is my first-person controls. And what it's doing is it's saying, hey, my first-person controls, use the camera as the object that I'm looking at, or that I'm moving around with. By the way, you can point any object to this. So for example, if you have an avatar or cube, something else, instead of my camera object being the one that I'm using, I can use my sphere object. But it has to be declared before my sphere has to be declared before my first-person controls have to be set up. My look speed is how fast I can look, left, right, up, and down, as an example. My movement speed is how I can move forward and back, left and right. And I can enable or disable look vertical, right? So look vertical means looking up and down, right? And I can also constrain vertical, so it stops at the top and stops at the bottom. I can also establish a vertical min and a vertical max. So how far I can go high and how far I can go down and stuff. And also longitude and latitude constraints right here. That's what these things are right here, longitude and latitude. And we can figure this out. So that's what this first-person controls does. Cool, so I got this, I'm good. I need two more things now, right? Let's go back to my gist. So I got all the stuff, blah, 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 blah. And down inside my game loop, I have this one piece where there's my delta time. I'm gonna grab this first one, var delta is equal to clock.getDelta. And what that does is it gets the difference between each tick, right? So it gives you a more realistic way of keeping track of, instead of it working within the game loop, right? Each game loop, it gets the next tick. So it's more of a consistent timer. By the way, you can use that for many, many things. Time.getDelta time. Okay, and the next one is my first-person controls update. And I want to do that before my request animation frame is done, right? So just right here. And after my sphere rotation is done, just right before the end, where I do my first-person controls update, and I want to use delta, this delta time, as my target for when it updates. Okay, so instead of it updating every loop, it's going to update according to time.delta time. So the changes between seconds or milliseconds. That's what's happening. So more of a consistent timer. Again, I've converted my loop, in effect, right, from a update to fixed update just for the camera when it comes to moving. And by the way, when we do physics, you also need this time, this delta time, right? Okay, cool. So I've got that in there. I've got that game loop. Let's test it out. So I've saved it. And if I've done everything correctly, I should be able to go back here. It should be, oh man, what happened? Well, here's something that's not happening. I don't see anything, right? And I'm going to assume that it's not there, right? But actually, if I kind of zoom over here, whoa, 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 whoa. How come it's going over here? Whoa. What's rotating? My camera's not rotating. Here's something I could do if I want to make sure that this happens. So look, notice how it's continuously rotating, and I can't stop it, right? I want to pull out. want to pull back, I mean, right? So how do I do that? I can use the S key to pull back, right? Because I'm pulling back, here it is. And notice how, depending on the rotation that I'm going, right or left, I'm rotating my camera, right? There it is. I can pull back out, right? With the WASD keys. There's some tweaking we can do here. And I can pull in, right? Rotating in according to what my camera's looking at and rotate past it, right? Let me go back out. There's my left. You can also use the arrow keys. Right, so here's my arrow keys, in and out. One thing you'll notice is this. I can't click my control anymore. Take a look and try and click my control. Whoa, look. I can't do anything with this anymore. And if I click over here, it's like click forever. When you use the first person control, it completely disables the controller. There it is. If you press your left mouse button, you zoom in, and your right mouse button zooms out. That's the way this controller works, right? Now there's some inherent issues here, right? Notice how I can look up. I can do like kind of a camera look and look down, right? So I can look up and down, no problem, depending on where my camera is. Left and right in space. But I'm way out here, right? Which is a weird, crazy problem. Okay, let's change the target of our object. Instead of our camera, which is kind of a weird way of looking at it, let's look at our sphere as the target and see what happens, right? Go back to the drawing board. I'm going to go back up to this first-person controls and change my target. Instead of it being the camera, I'm going to make it the sphere. But here's a problem. My sphere is being defined down here. My sphere geometry and stuff, which is probably a good idea to move this stuff down. You don't have to because it'll refer, but just to be kind of, do things the right way. I want to kind of move it below where I declare my sphere. Who knows how it's going to be hoisted. And it's going to clean up some of this object here. And I'm going to press right-click Format Code just to reformat everything so it looks nice. Save it. And now look what I got. So here's this stuff going on. Now take a look at this. When I move my stuff, my axes are being flipped all over the place. Take a look. Whoa. Well, what about if I move my button? Oh, there's something I can move down. Whoa. Oh. Ooh. Yeah. Oh. Hey. Oh. Right? All over the place, right? Depending on where I'm moving. So think about this look axis, right? Stuff that's between the yellow, so the green and the red lines, right? There it is, right? That was me tapping. So now if I move it over here, depending on where I'm moving, right, it's kind of got a weird look to it, right? So my D key, actually, right, what's happening is it's moving across where I'm looking. Take a look. Depending on where I'm looking, my sphere is moving, right? With my D key. How come my D key is doing that? Huh? Okay, sorry. Getting too caught up with this crazy stuff, right? Guys, you have the beginnings of moving stuff around the board. If I can move stuff around the board, and by the way, I'm using a first-person controller. There's other ways we can do things as well to move stuff around. And I'm moving things physically. I'm not moving things by physics. I'm just actually changing the location of an object, right? So I'm moving it from X, Y, Z coordinate A to X, Y, Z coordinate B, from one vector to the next. That's all I'm doing here, right? Now, I still can't do this. I can't change this up a little bit, but notice how it'll still react to what I've done. Right, let me just refresh here for a second. Right, so depending on what I'm looking at, here's my look, up and down. If I look up and down, it changes my Z coordinate and my Y coordinate. Here my Y coordinate is looking all the way up now. Take a look at my Y. So my Y is actually right side up now. Here it is, as it's wobbling, right? And now as I look, I can make it rotate and do some weird stuff until it's gone. Let's try that again. Notice on my Y, there's my Y. My Y is like falling down over here. Take a look, right? But as I kind of look up and down, my Y coordinate stands up, and when it does, again, this is some neat effects you can do here, right? depending on what I use, I can kind of fly up into space, right? Okay, we're done for the day. I wanted you to understand how to use a library. That's what we were doing today. I use a foreign library called First Person Controls. We're going to try some other ones. Next day, we're going to do some fly controls and stuff like that. And I'll also want to talk about a little bit about raycasting. Okay, guys, thanks so much. See you next day. Remember, we have a quiz, first part of next day. Thank you.